All right, so I'm just welcoming everyone to our 3:30 session, Beautiful Ecologies, Deepening Connection to Place Through Relationship with Jessie, Sawyers, and Amanda Humphreys. We are recording this session today, so if you do not want to be recorded, please keep your camera off. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the presenters to introduce themselves and start us off nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. We wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. And as a school in our community, we've been thinking a lot about our approach to land acknowledgements. And with some inspiration from some Indigenous academics like Hayden King and Leanne Bettisamo-Simpson, we started to think about land acknowledgements as an opportunity for the speaker, whether it's a teacher or more often in our context, it's a student, to reflect on their own positionality, connection to the land, and commitments to being better uninvited guests here. So for myself, my ancestors are mostly Scottish and Irish, and a mixing of German and British in there as well. But that means I'm a settler here. And I want to recognize my responsibility to realize the privileges afforded to me by colonization and the continued oppression of BIPOC on this land, and to think critically about what that privilege means and what that responsibility comes with that. I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, close to the Haldimand Tract. The location of ongoing efforts of the 1492 Land Back Lane defenders to protect that treaty land from abusive development plans. One of my ongoing commitments is to learn about and teach my students about the powerful resistance of Indigenous people to or against land abuses by the government and capitalist infrastructure across Turtle Island, and specifically those fighting so close to the places in which I live and teach. So my name is Jessie, and I'm here with my colleague and dear friend, Amanda. And we are here representing a bigger group of educators from our school, the Bishop Strachan School, which is located in Toronto. And that group includes Alan Colley, the creator and leader of Aboriginal Eco Tours, which we will speak to in great detail today. He couldn't join us, but we will do our best to share his brilliance with you. Kathleen Grabowski and Shelley Van Benschop, two other teachers at our school. And we're here to share with you an ongoing project or a new way of thinking and being together in education that was started 3 years ago and continues to persist through this special year that we have lived. We have made a slide deck as well. I wanted to say before we really get into it, I've put this slide deck into a shareable resource that includes a list of resources from people that we are forever indebted to for the ways that they have opened and changed our minds and opinions and views of the world. And so I will pop that into the chat right now, as well as at the end for you to take a look at and learn from, hopefully. So I'll pass it over to you, Amanda.
Okay, thank you, Jessie. Can you hear me okay? Yes, okay, great. Okay, I'm Amanda Humphreys, and well, I'll give a little bit of my background. British is my background, but I grew up in a little tiny town, Uxbridge, Ontario, and have now lived overseas in Colombia, and then have now come to Toronto to make Toronto my home for the last 20 years or so. And so I'm so honored to be able to present with Jessie. We've met a few years ago and have struck a great friendship and a great connection between our learning and understanding, and have really pushed each other to really think beyond traditional means of understanding and move beyond that. So who we are, we wanted to position that as well as positioning as white women, speaking from a perspective of non-Indigenous connections, but we also wanted to ground ourselves in what our school has taken on as a philosophy, as an approach. And that is the Reggio-inspired approach. And that comes from Reggio Emilia, in a little town in Italy. And we have been inspired by it. I'm going to put it right out there. It's not a program to transport into a North American context. It is an approach. And it is something that we have looked for at for the past 15 years or so. And our school has really delved into understanding it from a North American context. And so some of the pillars that we really gravitate towards in this approach is, I'm going to start off with the 100 languages of children. And I'm going to give you a brief little snapshot of this, but there's much, much more depth, obviously, but just to give a bit of a grounding. Within our resources, we also give some other places that you can also, books as well, that you can also look into it. But it is a movement that has become worldwide, and we have become inspired by it. So the 100 languages of children is really taking it beyond the traditional of reading and writing, and really looking for how children can explain and advance their understanding through expressing in different ways. So for example, there might be looking at the human body and using clay to actually create it and mold it and shape it, and that as a way to understand what the skeleton is about. So really delving into other ways of expressing and not prioritizing math and literacy. Not that there's anything wrong with math and literacy, but it's just finding different ways of expressing and different ways of understanding and coming to understand different phenomena in our world. So that's 100 languages, one section, one part of this approach. The teacher as researcher is another part, and really pushing ourselves to become not just the sole knowledge keepers of understanding, but really sitting beside with the children and saying, hey, what is that? How does that work? Why does that work that way? And really becoming researchers alongside with the children of building your understanding and your knowledge. And that has been a pivotal piece of what we've been thinking about at the Bishop Strachan at the BSS. The other aspect is the image of the child. And it's a really pivotal piece that we come into conversation in dialogue with children and have an understanding that they bring so much. Even if they're 2 years old, they're 1 year old, they bring so much to the conversation. They see things in different ways than we might see. I was just actually in one presentation this afternoon where he said, oh, the professors and the teachers, we don't get a chance to sit down and draw. We don't. So there's so much that the students bring from their understanding and their interpretation and how they interact with the world, that we as educators need to take that on and really understand that the image of the child, of who they come to the table with and what they come to the table with, we need to value and honor that. And then coming to the pedagogy of listening, and that's sort of the pivotal piece that we're going to have sort of grounding for our presentation, the pedagogy of listening, and how we come about to this grounding of understanding, of listening. Are we listening with our different senses? Are we listening to others? Are we accepting? Are we understanding and receiving feedback? Are we interacting? Not just in a text form, but are we interacting and become connected with what we're doing and listening in multiple different ways? And so that's a pivotal piece. This Reggio-inspired approach, Reggio Emilia, their approach to education, their approach of way of thinking came out of the World War II, and their community was disconnected and they had wounds to heal, and they really wanted something to really change and reimagine what their education system is like. And so this came out of that, changing it, looking for ways to promote relationships, connections, and connect as humans, right? And really build that connection and that space. So that's just a bit of our grounding in terms of where we're coming from even before we started on this venture 3 years ago. So, Jess?
Yeah, and I'd also like to highlight that I think maybe unique to our approach is that, so Reggio is often a pedagogy that inspires a lot of our early years programming across Turtle Island. However, at our school, we follow that approach all the way up to grade 6. And so both Amanda and I teach currently in the junior grades. And this project is based in junior grades, grade 4 specifically. And so like Amanda said, the history, like the origins of the Reggio approach came from this place of trauma to restore dignity to the people and to like reimagine educational spaces as places for and with community. And so for us, we started a few years ago really thinking about how to honor not just the pedagogy, like the principles of the pedagogy, but that history and where that origin was. And so we started thinking about what it meant to practice or be inspired by that pedagogy here on this land in a place with its own deep wounds to mend, and a history of intentionally attempting to remove dignity from both people and the land itself. And so we saw our role as shifting, and saw the importance of reinterpreting this pedagogy towards one that honors and gives voice to the histories of and current stories unfolding in the relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people on this land. And so we began researching and asking questions of Indigenous community members about what that might look like for us as a group of settlers teaching at a school with incredible privilege, a lot of socioeconomic privilege, as well as for many, a lot of racial privilege as well. So really what that looks like. And so I wanted to just highlight 2 quotes that have really helped us in thinking about what possibilities of what this might look like. So the first is Robin Wall Kimmerer from Braiding Sweetgrass. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. And then Chief Seattle in 1854, humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. And so we started recognizing how extractive some of our approaches to knowledge acquisition were, and how much distance there was between some of the things that we were learning about and our own place, our own position. And so we started thinking about how to shift away from learning about things and towards learning from and learning with. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, for anyone who's familiar with her work, has really in many ways transformed that. And so we thank her for that opening of our minds. And so specifically in this project that we're about to explain, I promise we're getting there, was a real focus on the pedagogy of listening. We saw this kind of, as we started learning more about Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous knowledge acquisition, we recognized a synergy between the pedagogy of listening that comes from the Reggio approach and Indigenous worldviews. And so again, 2 quotes I wanted to ground us in. Again, Robin Wall Kimmerer. I like to imagine that when Sky Woman scattered her handful of seeds across Turtle Island, she was sowing sustenance for the body and also for the mind, emotion, and spirit. She was leaving us teachers. The plants can tell us her story. We need to learn to listen. And then from Carla Rinaldi, who's one of the major thinkers behind the Reggio Emilia pedagogy, listening is an active verb, which involves giving interpretation, giving meaning to the message, and value to those who are being listened to others. And so for us at BSS, the pedagogy of listening, we always interpreted it as this way of giving dignity and value to our students and their ideas. However, we started to shift our thinking a little bit in that to thinking about the pedagogy of listening and decentralizing human beings from that pedagogy, and instead thinking about or imagining what it might look like to practice a pedagogy of listening with place and with beings outside of human beings. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Amanda.
Okay. And so we'll get into the project. It's not a project, actually. It's actually a way of being, a way of thinking. And I always, when we ventured into this and I started reflecting, it didn't feel right to call it a project. It was a way of being, a way of thinking. We were thinking about a pedagogy of listening. We were thinking about learning, moving away from learning about Indigenous ways and learning from and with. And so really it became a pivotal, not recognizing it right initially, but we were changing as teachers, as humans, as connections with our earth and our world. And the students were alongside. So one powerful impact influence that we had was meeting and making a connection with Alan Colley. He's the founder of Toronto Aboriginal Eco Tours and phenomenal individual. And in the past, what we had done often was we'd had people in. We'd have a person come in, they would do storytelling for the day. We'd get as many students as we could involved in that. And that was wonderful. But we really were longing, we were longing for a relationship. We knew that there was something that we were missing that we needed to build even further. And Alan came across our path and made that connection. It was really fortunate to be a part of what his experience and his growing and learning alongside ours as well. It became a year-long sort of progress in terms of thinking about things, and we've also actually reconnected with him again with the same students this year, along with Kim Wheatley, and have made an incredible connection. And so that focus of really reaching out, and I've heard this through other presentations as well, that connection, that relationship, building that relationship. It wasn't just a one-off check the box, but it was a building of that relationship and making sure that he was part of it. So he was able to join us on a monthly basis, and having him come back as well and talk with the teachers, and having a workshop at lunchtime, talking and sharing and having conversations and dialogue. It wasn't just a transmission of information. It was a dialogue that was starting to form, and those relationships were very powerful. So our place that we connected with was Cedarvale Ravine in Toronto, and it was just a few blocks away from our school. And we made a relationship, we made a connection, and we made intentional purposes that we would visit frequently. We would go once or twice or three times. At the point right now in grade 6 right now, we were going twice a week, and we built that in. We fought for supervision. We fought for teachers to be able to come with us to have the ratios, but really thinking about building that relationship and that connection with Alan, but also with the ravine, with the place, and that building that reciprocity as well. Jess?
And so one thing that I'd like to explain is our approach to science and social studies, because I think that that's really where this project or this experience kind of took off, was in that. And so what we did as a faculty, this was before my time, our faculty got together and took a look at the science and social studies curriculums, and looked at all of the details, all of the points of each grade, and thought together about what might be the big ideas, interpreted our own big ideas, and enduring kind of understandings. And so the way that we approach that now is through these big ideas exclusively. So every grade has 2 to 3 big ideas that are based in the curriculum, but every year it looks vastly different because they're interpreted through the people that are involved, as well as through what's happening in the world in that time when that grade or that group of children is in that grade, in that space with those teachers. And so one example of that is the big idea of ecology, which is one of the big ideas in grade 4. We have ecology and we have voice. And so we have this big idea that that transcends the entire year. So it doesn't end up just being a unit or a moment in time throughout the year, but it's actually the entire grade 4 experience is surrounded or is focused on ecology and voice. And so we have these enduring understandings, and I'll read them out. So for ecology, the enduring understandings are that ecology can be viewed not only by considering what sets things apart, but also what brings things together. Species are in constant communication with their environment, and the environment is in constant communication with various species within it. Each one responds to the other in a symbiotic way and is mutually necessary. And there are reciprocal responsibilities between the different components of any community. Examples, nature or human. Humans are a part of the environment, not masters of it. And so these enduring understandings shift and change. And every year at the start of the year, we sit down with every teacher that will touch the lives of that group of children that year. So we have our phys ed teachers and our arts and music and homeroom teachers, and our administration joins, and we all sit down together and we look at those enduring understandings, and sometimes they shift. Sometimes we have new ways of wording them or thinking about them. And then we think about provocations. So things that either connect to what's happening in the world, or us as educators, what we are really feeling passionate about or want to bring to the table that year. And so together we think about all the possibilities, all the ways that we might provoke the children to think about this big idea and send us all on whatever path and journey we find ourselves on towards these enduring understandings. And so as a result, we call it investigative research instead of science and social science. It's investigative research because it kind of encompasses both. And it's a big amount of our time that we spend with the kids. And I think as a result, this project was able to really live a full life throughout the entire year with the kids. So Amanda, I'll pass it back for you.
Okay. So the process of wondering together was really, we just wanted to, this is a beautiful portrait that Jessie has put together, because it shows that it wasn't a linear process throughout the whole entire time. It was a combination of exploring, questioning, there was a provocation, and then coming back. That idea that you're revisiting, that you are thinking about different theories, and then making connections and different ideas and really expanding on those ideas. And I think a part of this, obviously some of you will recognize this from knowledge building, that theory building framework as well from Scardamelia and Barida. But also from Reggio as well, the idea of provocations, the idea that ideas are fluid, that they come and they go, and revise and rethink of them too. And so this was a grounding, a piece for us to really connect with Alan. We didn't always necessarily pre-plan what we were going to do with Alan, because we took the moment as well as a provocation, as an idea to spur on more thoughts and thinking. And then you can see the lines in between, that the idea of building connections and theories and coming back to them and connecting ideas was a central part of how we progressed through this journey. And the ideas of interpreting multiple expressive languages, like I mentioned in terms of the skeleton, we didn't do that, but there were other examples that we'll follow through and show you about how learning about that experience through being open to different possibilities. So next we'll have a look at some documentation. So the students, they came with those initial questions. They had provocations. We went to the ravine. We had our first interactions with Alan. We were thinking about really listening. We did not go to the internet. We did not go to the books right away. We were very intentional that we wanted to use and think about, how are we listening to our environment? How are we really connecting with our space, with the place, with Cedarvale Ravine, in order to understand where we are and what we're understanding? So the groups eventually formed, and there were 3 groups: the trees, plants, and fungi, and then creatures, and then formation. And they came, and you can see on this slide, sort of see because they're small, you can see that some of these questions are really pivotal to understand, but they weren't questions that were going to get them, oh, I'm going to get an answer from a dictionary or from the encyclopedia or online, right? They were questions that needed observations, and we really wanted to hone and build that sort of journey and understanding. It's similar to the presentation yesterday or today, or one of the presentations that we've seen, but the idea of embodying and being in the experience. It is not just a venture one day going to the ravine. It is really coming to understand and to know that place. And these questions came out of that beginning of that emotional connection to place, and that empathy and that understanding, that wanting and desire to really go deeper into this.
Okay, and so I'll share with you some more documentation as well. So like we said, the expressive languages are have always been a really important part of how we approach investigative research at our school. So that's science and social studies learning. And in this project, it became more important than ever, because it was, I think, an opportunity to look with new eyes and for a new purpose at some of the things that we were studying. And so there was lots of gathering that happened in our ravine of things that we wanted to learn more about. And with Alan's guidance and knowledge, we were able to gather a bunch of things that might help us get some answers that we were looking for. And so we gathered a ton and brought a lot of it back to our school. And so in that gathering, we brought some of our samples to our arts program. And so our art specialists, with them and the students, they looked at some other things that they had found, but with this new kind of approach or a new motivation. And the motivation was to see like an artist sees. So looking really closely at the beauty of some of those things that we had found in the ravine, and looking at the patterns and the colors and the formations in this new way, and ultimately opened up, I think, for many of our students, like it does for us as educators, opened up our hearts and our minds to a more emotional or spiritual connection to some of these things that we were observing within the ravine. And so our trees, plants, and fungi group found a big puffball mushroom, huge puffball mushroom, as well as some turkey tail and some other fungi specimens, and took a look at those with some special tools to look really, really closely, and used some of our materials in the studio to reinterpret or imagine lives for those things, and emotions for those things, and bodies for those things. And then our creatures group took a look at our some of the worms from our vermicomposter, and you can see all of them are touching and feeling these things as they're looking so closely. So this real, like, kind of embodied exploration, but again with the idea that we're looking at them as artists. So what could we see in these things that are special, or that are coming out to us that maybe they didn't before? And then our formation group gathered, along with some crystals that our teacher has gathered along her travels, gathered some stones and rocks from our ravine as well to look at how formation occurs in nature as artists as well.
And so another beautiful story that came out of this experience, this journey, was there were two students. And they were in the trees, the plants and the fungi, and they had questions, and they had observed and researched and connected, and were on the cusp of going deeper. And then they were prompted to come together because they were talking about similar things. And they were like, okay, we're a bit stuck. We're not sure what to do. So they started sharing their different ideas, and were left alone on the side of near the front of the school to connect and share different things and see if they could prompt what might be their next theory, what might be their next question, where are they thinking about, what should they do when they go to the ravine next. And coming out of that beautiful connection, that beautiful union, was this poem. It wasn't a piece of research or a direction to go or what to do, but it was a poem, this beautiful poetic piece that the two of them created organically. And so here it is. Breathing in, breathing out is the title. Tree and tree has branches that are free. Roots and roots combine together, making friends forever. Breathing in, breathing out. Humans come and gather around, breathing in, breathing out. Just sit with that for a moment.
We also, in the slide deck that I shared, and I'll share it again at the end, we've included some more documentation. We couldn't share all of it today, but there's some more beautiful poems, because there was this like just magical moment when these two created this poem, and then it happened almost so quickly, and it was so beautiful. And then they really wanted to share it with their peers. And so they shared it. And then all of a sudden, all of these poems started popping up. Like kids would come home from the weekend and they would say, Miss Sawyers, I have to show you a poem that I wrote about the trees. And they would read me this poem that they had written because they were so inspired. And it had this just beautiful snowball effect of all of a sudden we were thinking in metaphor in ways that helped us understand, I think, so much deeper our emotional connection to these things that we were learning about. And so on this slide I've shared, and again in the resource, there's more of this, and you can look more closely if you're interested. But part of our role as teachers, because we had these groups researching these different things, and they're so invested and so focused on what it is that they were learning. And so part of what we wanted to do as educators was to look at, like, kind of zoom out a little bit and look at a macro level at what the unfolding story. And so we visualized in this way, and this is something that we did by looking at lots of documentation of student questions and quotes and photographs the students had taken and stories they had told. So as educators, we took all this documentation and we tried to visualize it in a way to help us see from our own interpretation what was happening, so that we could again bring ourselves back and ground ourselves in the enduring understandings and think about how we could help them see what was happening at a bigger level, because there was something so powerful happening at this macro level, and we could see it because we as educators were popping in and out of all these conversations, but they were in their own world, so focused. And so and as I'm sure many of you know, that such a big component of knowledge building is that sharing, right? And so you go off and you wonder on your own, and you explore and think on your own, and then you come back together and you share together. And so this is an example of kind of one approach that we took as educators, which then led us to figuring out a way to help the students see that as well. And Amanda will explain that.
So the next part of our journey was that we had the students come together in mixed groups. And so a few from the trees, a few from the trees, a few from the trees, a few from the formation, and some from the creatures, sorry, came together in cross groups, and that idea of building knowledge together. And it was fascinating to see that they were able to make these connections. So what they did originally for this was they had, so this is twofold. One, too bad we didn't have two pictures, but we had one where it was just the paper behind, and they drew all the things that they had been thinking about from the different groups. And then we put another sheet of paper over top, and then they came up and they drew lines and they drew Post-it notes about the connections between. And some of the kids were saying, oh my goodness, I'm studying fungi, and I know that they have ways of communicating between the trees. Did you know? And she's talking to a tree person who's connected with the trees. Did you know? And did you know that the animals are connected in this way? And so really building on that. And I think the big piece was because Alan didn't speak as here about the trees, here about the creatures, here about the formations in the ravine. When he spoke, he always interwove and made those interconnections. And so they then were able to also have that sort of similar type of dialogue when they were building connections and having a look through that. So that coming together also brought that greater understanding of ecology and those enduring understandings. Factual pieces, yes, in pockets for sure, but they didn't need to all hold on to those factual pieces. They were able to rise as in knowledge building, rise above, and to be able to make those connections and see those overarching pieces. And that helped them build those understandings of the enduring understandings.
Yeah, and so we've shared some of it here, and like I said in the slide deck, there's more, but documentation has always been, for us as educators, a way that we've thought about kind of embodying the pedagogy of listening. And if you're familiar with Reggio, it's such an important part, is the documentation of ideas as a way to give value and to listen deeply. And so usually in documentation plays an important role in how we interpret and understand the unfolding story. But oftentimes in the past, we had just done it as educators. And so we started to really recognize kind of the power and the autonomy of being a documenter, and how it gave you this like new way of listening. And us as educators, we had gotten so used to it, and we hadn't really thought about what that might look like for the kids to be documenters and kind of curate their own story of their experiences. And so we equipped them with the same tools that we use as documenters. So sketchbooks and cameras and art supplies and recording devices. And together, students and educators, we started to document this unfolding story. And I'll just read what we wrote here. Listening as a process of coming into relationship with the unfolding stories, the narrative being told and the experiences being lived. So documentation was the context that made possible and visible the complexity of this living project, and listening became the story. So all of a sudden, our approach to interpreting our own experiences and the students' approach to interpreting their own experiences allowed them to show their listening in a new way, not only with each other as a really important part of knowledge building together, but also with their broader community, because there was this growing sense as we went through the year and we had these really powerful moments with Alan. The kids, I think, really started to realize how important the experience was, and how like they should be really valuing this time and sharing that with people who didn't have that opportunity. And so that included their parents and their families, as well as other kids in our school. And so next we'll show you kind of what came of that. I think it's important to note that documentation for us was always this, and I think in this project and continues to be, a way to tell a story that is still unfolding. So you're telling the story throughout, and by the time you've told it, it's already changed. And I think that there's something really lovely about that, because it's not like the end, you know, it's only just a moment. It's only capturing one time within something bigger and greater. So Amanda, I'll go.
So this was an example. This is an example of students who have curated their work. They've came up with this group, the trees, the plants, the fungi. This was a drawing in the middle here, a drawing that they had done, you know, when you can fold the paper 3 ways and you draw it and then you fold it over and pass it on to the next person, fold it over, pass it to the next person. So that was one of those magical creations. They, on the left-hand side, they said a declaration. They were declaring to the community, this is what we're doing. This is what we are researching. And it says, I'll read a bit. We are researching trees, plants, fungi, and algae. We are curious about these things because they are super duper awesome. And some people don't even know things existed, like glowing mushrooms and poison plants. Nature is really clever and have all these wonderful plants that help trees and can help us, like medicine, and they are super fascinating. It goes on, our research is important because we see things outside and it's good to learn what's out there, to know the different sorts. So you can learn and it doesn't harm you. What we think about these things, it helps us learn, and it is also to help others too. We should share with people everything or everywhere, because the trees help us breathe and give us oxygen. If we learn about this, we could help save the earth and ourselves. We show gratitude for the animals and plants because they were here first. We still wonder, and then they have questions. We still wonder why different kinds of mushrooms, have different kinds of things that they do. We also wonder about symbiosis. Then on the far right, there were some of the pictures that they took of each other, some of the drawings that they had, and also then some of the other few sentences and things. But this was their creation. And as Jessie mentioned, in previous years, it had usually been the teachers that had created this sort of final piece, but we have moved away from it being a final piece of documentation, a final documentation panel, to in the moment. I think this happened about maybe halfway through, 3/4 of the way through, and it was a declaration of where they were at, what they were thinking, they were almost exploding. We need to share this, and not having parents come into the classroom or things like that. They wanted to be able to share this with the broader community, and this was one of the forms. And it showed how they were listening, right? It came back that they were listening not just about things, but they were learning from and with, and they were taking that idea of that pedagogy of listening and really embodying what that meant.
And so just in closing, we wanted to share a couple of quotes from the kids that we think are just really powerful, and to us at least encapsulate really what this experience was and continues to be. So this is by Marin in grade 4. Learning about Indigenous ways. I didn't know that you could give thanks to trees like tobacco, and didn't know that trees had feelings. I feel like if I'm ever going to play in it or take any of this sap, I should be grateful, because it is letting us play on it and letting us take its sap. In return for playing in it, we could work to protect it and help it. If you see a grapevine on a baby sapling, you should take it off. Before, I thought the ravine was a place to take your dog on a walk, but now I think different.
And we're going to leave you with a final poem at just the end, since poetry seems to be threaded throughout our journey. And this is written by Amelia, and when she was in grade 4, and it's often come back. She's in grade 6 with me as well again this year, and we've read it as a land acknowledgement for some of our assemblies. But this was a student that challenged reading and writing, and this came because of the experience, because of the journey that she had. And this is the poem that we'd like to leave you with. So, Looking for a New World by Amelia in grade 4. Deep in the earth, a new song sings, awakening seeds of the coming spring. Voice of the past, voice of the land, which calls to remind you on shoulders of generations we stand. The past is the stone on which future depends, which uploads and heals nature and defense. Honor the land, the power in you. Remember these words, to your own self be true.
I get teary-eyed every time I hear that poem. I wish you could all meet this child. She's magic. I put in the chat one more time the slide deck. I'll write it. I'll put it in one more time if you want. I know we went through some stuff fast. And there's like I said, a list of resources there that matter to us a lot, and that we are very much indebted to. And with that, Amanda, I'll just pass it right back to you.
Yep, as Jessie mentioned, there are a few recommended readings if you want to. There's a few slides. But one of the pieces is that we would like to also connect with the community. If you were in Toronto or close to it, or actually, it doesn't really matter. The summer symposium we have at BSS is July 7th, 8th, and 9th this year, and it will be online, a new format for us. But that's a chance for networking, dialoguing, having conversations about the different pieces that are related to inquiry-based and regio-based approaches to education. And so that is an opportunity to connect. Information will be out about the Investigations and Expressions Summer Symposium at BSS in the beginning of July. And also, it's a great way to connect and find people that are talking. We've had conversations about some people are in their classrooms or in their spaces and don't have people to dialogue. And so this is a great opportunity to connect with people. And then we also, we're excited that part of this conversation is in the NARIA magazine in Innovations, and you can read more about that as well. But we're excited. We want to open up this dialogue and conversation with others. So thank you. So
Great.
I wonder if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda and Jessie. I do want to just trying to allow the screen to open up for others, but we have time for 1 or 2 questions. A lot of great feedback in the chat, including this was one of the most touching presentations I've ever seen in over 2 decades of econ. So thank you so much for your good work. And yeah, I think one question that I'm spotting is, you mentioned having to fight for the time to be outside and for chaperones. Did you encounter resistance from admin or parents?
I can take that one. Yes, we did. Not so much admin. I think they were super open to it. We have there's numbers, right, for supervision. So that was the trick, was figuring that out with the people in the building and making sure that we had enough people there to support it. And so that was the only trick from that side, but definitely from parents. We did at the beginning, and some throughout too. But I think that we were super like honest and open with those conversations. So we knew why we were doing it, and we were really we felt really strongly about that, which helped as well because we had a community behind us, right? There's multiple people that felt the same way about this, so that obviously feels good, and you feel like you have a stronger leg to stand on with people behind you. But then as well, I think there were many times when we opened conversation with parents about it, because again, sometimes it's hard, I think, to relay the reasons why we do things at school with our families, but also so important because this really mattered to us, and if those conversations and if that support is coming from home as well, it lasts so much longer and is so much more powerful. And so I think there were some hard conversations, continue to be. This has been something we've been doing for quite a while now, and there continue to be hard conversations with families. But I also think, in a way, they're so good, because it opens up a conversation and it provides an opportunity for us to really explain in the similar way we have here today why this matters, and why parents, we hope, can see that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. It is 4:20, so I'm going to have to wrap us up. I know you might have had some contact information you might want to drop into the chat, or if it's included in a slide deck. Because there are quite a few questions still remaining that we just don't have the time for right now. So maybe folks can get in touch with Jessie and Amanda after the session today. So I'll give just a second for that. And I also want to encourage you to join on to our closing ceremony at 4:30 in just 10 minutes time for our Ecom Awards and our closing by Nancy Rowe. We're really looking forward to that. And thank you so much for joining Ecom this weekend. I hope everyone had a blast and learned a lot. So again, thank you, Amanda and Jessie, and thank you, delegates, for joining our session. The slide deck and contact information is in the chat. So I'll give you just 1 minute to please record that or take a picture as fast as you can. And then I'm going to close us out, okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the closing ceremonies.
Thank you.